Hey everyone, Tripp Harrison here at Twiford Funeral Home in beautiful Manteo, North Carolina, bringing you another video in our series, When Someone Dies. This is a series of videos that help people navigate the logistics that have to be worked through when there is a passing of a loved one, and it's a difficult time to make decisions and to think clearly, so we hope that through this series of videos we can help people put those decisions to bed easily without too much emotional conflict. Today we're going to talk about something that's a little different. It's what I call special touches, which are things that can be done in a funeral service or memorial service that make that event unforgettable in a positive way. Funerals sort of have a general rap of being not fun and morbid and whatnot. But the fact is, funerals are a great way to remember a life lived, and anything we can do to make that special and unique in representing that particular person is definitely a plus, in my opinion. So the funerals are important because it's part of the grieving process. We all seek a finality to things like this, and this certainly can start the healing process. So many families choose to take an extra step or two to make their loved one's last presentation special and endearing. Not every funeral home offers all the services I'm going to talk about today. You'll have to consult, depending on where you are, with the funeral home that you've selected and see which ones of these services are available. We are Twiford Funeral Homes in eastern North Carolina, the Outer Banks, and Elizabeth City. So I'm speaking to services that we provide, and it's likely you'll find a funeral home that will be able to honor these requests in your area if you do a little due diligence to look for one. The first and most simple special touch you can have for a funeral is photographs and a memorabilia collage or display. Typically those are made by a family member. They'll get a piece of foam board and put together pictures from their loved one's life, from being a child up through their growing up years, adult years, and older years, depending, of course, upon the situation. But those are great to reminisce with. Some people will just bring a photo album and they'll place it on a table in front of the chapels or the church, and those who come for the visitation, if there's a visitation, or those who maybe come early to the funeral can have a chance to look through those things and remember some of the great times in the lost loved one's life. I've seen people actually make a display of memorabilia. I've seen tables set up in the chapel, for example, where there is a visitation or viewing of the loved one, and there'll be a table set up with golf clubs or knitting needles, or sometimes I saw a guitar once laid out that was the deceased loved one's guitar, and those kinds of things are really special. People will touch those items, and that touching is a connection to their memories of that loved one. So that can be a big plus rather than just have sort of standard issue eulogy. It makes it a very personal experience. Many funeral homes will make a DVD which is comprised of photos and special music perhaps, or some written text from the family. It's given to the funeral home, and they will create a sort of a PowerPoint or a mini movie that has all those items, those photos, and that can play during the service or before the service or after the service. And in most cases, families can be given a copy of that to take home to look at a later point, just when they want to reminisce a little bit about the lost loved one. They have that. In some cases, depending on copyright issues, multiple copies of that can be made and distributed to as many family members as want them. Ask your local funeral home to if they offer this service, and if they would provide additional copies, or if you can make them yourselves. Another important thing that can be done to make the funeral special is having live music. Now, lots of funeral homes include live music for funerals. Some choose traditional religious songs, Amazing Grace or How Great Thou Art, or sort of the classic funeral home hymns, and some that are appropriate, other religious songs that might be appropriate for that type of occasion. But as time has moved forward, it's not uncommon to have musical favorites or songs that we associate or that we know that the loved one really loved, played either at the service or before the service begins. Sometimes they're performed live, sometimes they are pre-recorded. Other things that you might find across the country, and we have here at Twiford, is a dove release. A dove release is typically done at a graveside funeral, and the dove's keeper brings out a group of doves, and at a certain point in the service, those doves are released into the sky, and they fly off, and as far as everyone knows, they just go off somewhere. Well, in reality, those doves are trained to come back to their home base, and it's very humane, and all the doves return, and nothing is lost. But it is a very common thing for funerals who really want to display peace and calm. It is a very, to me personally, I find it to be very soothing to see those birds, beautiful white birds, fly off together to symbolize the soaring of the spirit of the lost loved one to the heavens. If a loved one is cremated, there can be ceremonies involving the disposition of the cremains or the ashes. We do that at sea. Sometimes they'll take a boat out and scatter those cremains in a ceremony. We actually have urns that we offer that are biodegradable. And rather than going out on a windy boat and throwing cremains in the air and having them blow around, they can just set this urn onto the water, and it degrades quickly and sinks into the ocean or the body of water and disperses the ashes that way. Military honors. Local veterans groups typically provide a small group of active duty or retired military vets that will come out and do a flag folding ceremony. Sometimes they have available someone who can play taps on the trumpet or the bugle, and that is a very common military salute. There's also gun salutes. At some funerals, we'll see the traditional 21 gun salute, which is ordinarily done for very high-ranking officers or for dignitaries, but I've seen it for military service personnel in general. There's also a thing called a 3-volley salute, which is a variation that's used a lot at Arlington National Cemetery. Final thing is first responders. First responders typically who pass away have a high involvement by their co-workers in the funeral. They're very, very, for example, if a police officer dies or a fireman dies, there's a big participation in that funeral by their cohorts. The services can become quite intense and much more involved when the death was in the line of duty. We've seen many of those, and that's a whole different situation because there's a lot of emotion there, and sometimes those services are quite complex. But in the ordinary course of day-to-day, if a first responder passes away from some other circumstances, or perhaps they were retired, there's still salutes that can be given to them. For example, the fire department, it's not uncommon to see the co-workers from the fire department bring out equipment to the funeral, either the funeral home or the cemetery. I've seen, trucks, fire trucks out there. They've even had fire trucks brought out, and we will load the casket containing the body of the loved one onto the fire truck, and the fire truck will make the procession to the cemetery. So that's a really special thing that's certainly never forgotten. With police, usually there's a large presence of fellow officers there, and some of those gun salutes we talked about are performed at some police funerals as well. So it just depends on the preferences of the family and the availability, quite frankly, of fellow officers to do such a thing. EMS and other life-saving organizations are honored in the same way. A lot of participation by their co-workers. So one last thing is it's not uncommon for first responders service to include the music of a bagpiper. This dates back to the earlier American history and European history when the potato famine was raging through Ireland, and a lot of those folks immigrated to the U.S., and because of the large influx of people, it was usually those immigrants that took on the harder, tougher, more dangerous jobs here. And at their funerals, when they would pass away, the bagpipes were played sort of as a tribute to their heritage, and that's sort of become woven into our funeral culture. So many funeral homes, including Twiford Funeral Home, have bagpipers on standby, so to speak, available for funerals. Just remember, as you think about your loved one's service, remember that funeral service is not for the dead. It's for those who love them, and it should play an important part in honoring what that loved one contributed to each of us. I'm Tripp Harrison with Twiford Funeral Homes in Elizabeth City and Manteo, North Carolina. Thanks for letting me be with you today. Be sure to like and subscribe to this channel and share it with others who might be facing times like this as well. We hope that you'll check out our website at twifordfh.com. Thanks for being here, and we'll see you on the next video.